Happy Native American Heritage Month. I'm Cassidy Franklin, and I'm a billing specialist with Compass Health Network here in Clinton, Missouri. I'm also an enrolled Karuk Tribal Descendant member, and today we're going to talk about a little about Native American history and the way we celebrate our diverse cultures today. So to start off with, I'm going to talk a little bit about my tribe, which is the Karuk tribe, which is nestled in Northern California in the Klamath National Forest. We are the second largest tribe in California, but although we are the second largest tribe, we do not have a reservation. Instead, we have federal trust land. And in order for us to get federal trust land, we have to be a federally recognized tribe. Now, what is a federally recognized tribe? A federally recognized tribe is considered a sovereign nation within the U.S. So that means there are government-to-government relationships on federal, state, and local levels. That also means that federally recognized tribes are entitled to receive selected federal funding, benefits, services, and protections. So to start off with, we're going to talk a little bit about a topic that's very prevalent right now in Native American communities all over the U.S., which is language and cultural revitalization. Now, when I say language and cultural revitalization, many people may be wondering, well, why would you need to revitalize the culture? Why would you need to revitalize a language? Well, there are many answers to that question, but one of the most common answers is intergenerational trauma. Now, intergenerational trauma is trauma that's been passed down throughout several generations, from grandparents to parents to children, and not many people understand that aspect. And so to give some examples, I'm going to go over a little bit about Native American history that not many people know about. When people think about Native American history, most people associate that type of history with settlers settling out west. They think about the Trail of Tears. They don't know that some of the oppression that Native Americans have faced have been more recent. So I'm going to give a few examples of Native American history and that many people may not know. So although many people know genocide happened with Native Americans, they don't understand the context to it. One of the worst cases of genocide for Native Americans was in California, and it was the California Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, which happened in 1850. This was enacted by the first governor of California, and from the name of it, Protection of Indians, many people would think, oh, that can't be that bad. Well, it basically legalized a form of slavery for Native Americans. This law provided for indentering of children to whites, Indian children to whites, so Native children could be taken away and given to other families outside of the tribe. And it also punished vagrant Indians by hiring them to the highest bidder at public auction if the Indian could not provide sufficient bail or bond. Now, when I say vagrant, that basically meant any person could go up to a Native American person and accuse them of a crime, and because they were Native, they were never believed that they didn't commit it. So if they didn't have bail or bond, they were automatically sold off. This law led to hundreds of massacres across the state of California, and that led to a severe population decline that is compared to the Armenian genocide today. When you think about that, you think, wow, that's huge. Why don't more people know about this? Well, it's not something that's talked about very often. Many textbooks in schools today just skip over a lot of Native American history because it doesn't want to be talked about. But this population decline basically caused many tribes to be extinct. It left only a few members within some tribes. It also cut some tribes in half. So it was definitely a very, very harsh time for Native Americans during that time. This went on from 1850 into the late 1890s. But when that ended, oppression for Native Americans wasn't over. This began the start of the boarding school era, which was not only in California, but it was nationwide. In 1891, the government issued a law that enabled Native American children to be forcefully taken from their homes and their reservations. When these children were taken, they were put into these boarding schools across the U.S. And by the end of the boarding school era, there were hundreds of boarding schools all over. Children were taken sometimes hundreds or thousands of miles away from their reservations or their families. And when these children got to the boarding schools, they enacted the philosophy of kill the Indian in him, but save the man. And so what happened is when these children arrived, they were completely stripped of their culture and of their languages. Their hair was cut, and in many Native American cultures, the length of their hair is a very significant thing. They also were forbidden to speak their indigenous languages or practice any part of their culture. And Native American children often had their names replaced with European names in order to civilize and Christianize them. And if any children at these schools practiced any type of culture, if they sang, if they danced, if they spoke their language, if they wore their regalia or did anything, if they prayed within their own culture, they were severely punished. And their punishment went as far as corporal punishment sometimes. And when you think about that, you think that these types of punishment were given to children. Is very, very shocking. At these schools, many children also died from diseases such as tuberculosis and measles. This was due to malnutrition, overcrowding, poor sanitary conditions, and also the fact that these students were weakened by overwork. When these children passed away, sometimes their loved ones back home didn't even know that they were sick. They didn't know until these children had died. And death was so prevalent within the boarding schools that many boarding schools had their own graveyards because of how high the death toll was from disease. It was a very, very hard time in Native American history. Now, this era, the boarding school era, went on from 1891 until when the last residential boarding schools closed in 1970s. Now, towards the end in the 1970s, treatment wasn't as harsh as it had been in the beginning, but there were reports done in the early 1900s recommending that these schools be closed, and instead of closing them, they created more. So it was a very, very hard time for Native Americans, and due to all this harsh treatment of Native Americans for hundreds of years, trauma was passed down from their parents to their children. And when these kids came home to their reservations, they were frightened to practice their culture. They couldn't speak the language without having some sort of fear associated with it. So when they had their own families, they were scared to pass on their own culture and languages. And so over time, the language and culture of many tribes across the U.S. were lost. That brings us into a really hot topic within Native America today, which is endangered languages. As of right now, there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the U.S., and there is an estimated less than 200 languages remaining. That's less than half of Native tribes have their own language anymore. And within those languages remaining, most of them only have elders speaking it fluently. And so it's a really big push within the Native American communities right now in order to try and save it and change it. So there's tons of federal and private grants and funding being offered to different tribes to develop programs, to create classes and curriculum to teach the younger generations the language. There's also master apprentice programs where you take a master speaker and work with an apprentice to get them up to that level as well. And there are a lot of grants for documentation purposes right now. For example, my tribe has worked with University of California, Berkeley, and we have our own Karuk dictionary. All of our language is documented. Well, I shouldn't say all, most of it is documented within a dictionary. We also have a website sponsored through UC Berkeley, and there are recordings of our elders, some of them who have passed away already, who are speaking the language, who are speaking the alphabet in order for us to be able to continue to learn on and to get the right structure phonetically. And it is because of this funding that tribes all across the US are being able to save their culture and languages, which is a very, very beautiful thing. So, what most Native Americans today do, instead of focusing on the misjustices that we have all faced as a community, we choose to celebrate the rich ancestry and traditions of tribes. We celebrate our culture. And a way that most tribes across the US celebrate that is through powwows. Powwows are a mixture of many different types of cultures and ceremonies put together, since so many different tribes lost their ceremonies, they lost their culture and their tradition. So a lot of tribes have adopted the different types of dances that are performed at powwows. It is essentially a gathering of nations, since tribes are considered their own sovereign nations. In fact, one of the largest powwows in the US is called a gathering of nations. It is such a beautiful thing to go to see so many different types of people come together and to be together as one, celebrating the way of life that many of us almost lost. And it really, when you see it, when you experience it for the first time, it's just such a thing of beauty to be able to see the perseverance of all of the different types of traditions that are continuing to live on today. Now, my tribe, the Karuk tribe, does not participate in powwows. We can go to it, but we don't dance in it because we still have our own ceremonies. One of our most famous one is called the World Renewal Ceremonies, which take place along the different village sites along the Klamath River. There are 3 different types of dances performed, and those are called the brush dance, the jump dance, and pikiavish. Many types of these dances are performed for demonstration purposes during Native American Heritage Month. The most well-known one is the brush dance. We have dance groups from our tribe that actually go to the capital of California every year for Native American Heritage Day and perform different types of demonstration dances for the thousands of people that gather there that day. Native American Heritage Month is about sharing our beautiful culture with people who are around us and people who want to learn. And the World Renewal Ceremony for the Karuk tribe is so important to us because it's a way for us to ensure a bountiful harvest the following year and also to restore social goodwill and health. And when I say the bountiful harvest, the Karuk tribes, 2 of the Karuk tribe's most traditional foods were smoked salmon and acorn soup. And so this ceremony ensures a healthy salmon run, not only for our tribe, but for the other tribes along our river, and also for a large crop of acorns. And the acorns were ground out into a meal or flour in order to use throughout the year to be able to sustain food for all of us. During Native American Heritage Month, many tribes across the US share their heritage for people who want to see it. You can go on Google and you can search Native American Heritage Month and you'll see an array of different cultures, of dances, of songs, of traditions, of regalia, of many different types and forms of culture that is just waiting out there to be shared. Instead of focusing on the cruelties committed against us, we focus on the hope for the future. We celebrate by educating others, and we celebrate by wearing our regalia, and we celebrate by practicing our culture and giving demonstration dances and attending powwows. We celebrate because we are still grateful to be here today, and we're still here to share our rich and diverse cultures with those around us who want to learn, with those around us who care to see what is still here. And because of that, I invite you to look up the different cultures around you, to look up the different types of Native American tribes. And I invite you to share and celebrate Native American Heritage Month with us. Thank you.